Grassroots is brought to you by Work It, meeting the needs of entrepreneurs in Stillwater since 2017. Welcome to Grassroots, a podcast series for growing civic engagement through conversation. I'm Chris Peters.
And I'm Michelle Charles, and we're your hosts for this series.
Here is part 2 of our conversation with Marc Trotter, candidate for Mayor of Stillwater.
Okay, so let's move it away from beekeeping.
Sure.
So what do you do for a living? You've talked about music. I know
Yeah.
you do some stuff with lights.
Yeah.
Talk to me about this.
So my primary source of income is lighting design. I do theatrical lighting design. So basically all that means is if you have a concert or a show, for instance, the Mid-South bike race, I'm actually literally working on a quote for all of that right now.
Nice.
For a stage, outdoor stage for that event, you know, when the riders finish. And we're still finalizing details, but I'm trying to coordinate potential lighting or audio needs with a couple other people. And that's something I do. I might do dance recitals where I provide lighting designs for them, for their dancers when they're doing their things. I try and match their outfits or whatever live during the show. Local churches, I do lighting for them, things like that. So that's really what I do.
And maybe for folks, so that would be like when you see, at a concert, like the lights are moving around.
That's right.
And you've got
all the stage lights.
Yeah.
That's really what I do. The stage lights, lighting the band, matching the music, doing all that stuff, moving, trying to get people more emotionally connected with what the musicians are trying to say.
Creating an atmosphere.
Yeah, create an atmosphere.
Okay, so this seems like a combination of the technical and the artistic.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It is.
Does being a musician yourself help with that?
I think so. I've seen a lot of lighting designers who had little to no musical background, and I don't know. I don't know what it is. It seems sometimes to me like it lacks some of that emotional depth and connection that really, like, in order to play an instrument well, even if you're not good at it, you don't have to be good at it, but if you feel it, well, man, you can still connect with people through it. You can help them feel something.
Put the emotion behind
Put the emotion. So I approach lighting in the same way.
I could see where having a sense of musicality
Yeah, absolutely.
would make a difference.
Yes. Your ability to sense how a song would typically move, the story they're trying to say, even the colors you use, like red is like a color of romance, passion, rage even, things like that.
Yeah.
And it's subjective. It
Sure.
really depends. Every person has a different, unique perspective on that.
Yeah.
Blue is a color of like peace and calm and serenity, but it can also be a very energetic, excited color. White is kind of like a purity, or it can just highlight and accentuate whatever color is there and make it pop even more. There's pink and magenta. Anytime you got a Valentine's Day or love song, you got to throw the pink in there sometimes. Yeah. It's a little cliche, but you're working off what people's psychology has been programmed to view, right?
Yeah.
There's those things that are buried inside of us, like in nature, if you see something yellow, you think anxiety, something's about to bite me. That's dangerous.
Or sting you.
Right.
Or sting you. Yeah, sting you. Or maybe it's a beautiful flower.
Sure.
Right.
It just kind of, and so you can take all these subjective perspectives of the colors, and regardless of if there's two different opposite meanings, depending on the words of the song and depending on how good you can help capture the emotion behind the music, you can help that artist tell a better story. I've seen many lighting designs where they make it about the light show and it takes away from the moment. It's actually quite distracting.
It should enhance, right?
It should
not overshadow.
Yeah, absolutely. You're kind of a part of the band, and a lot of guys, well, they maybe don't realize that yet.
Yeah, if maybe you've got a song that kind of hits like a a lull or a decrescendo.
Yeah.
And then you're like throwing off strobes,
Oh my goodness.
you
yeah.
know, and then or there's a crescendo and
Yeah.
and like the lighting just gets too intense before
Yeah.
it doesn't match the music.
Well, and you have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
You kind of you top out before you can even get where you're trying to go, and you lose the ability to match the intensity. And even in the context of an entire set, you've got to think to an extent, you want to think in terms of where we're going. You know, if you were to look at a full set, you look at the story that's being told, perhaps, you know, and sorry, I got a little too far off. You kind of look at the story that's being told, and you kind of view the journey and see where do I want the highest highs and lowest lows, maybe, you know, without overthinking it. You also just feel it.
Yeah.
It just kind of depends.
Wow. Well, you know, and it is part of storytelling. This reminds me a lot of crafting a story, especially like a feature story when I'm thinking about it.
Oh, yeah,
You know, it's like, what are the major notes? Where are people going to connect? What do I
Yeah.
feel like is really either the news hook or the
Mm-hmm.
thing that's going to tug at people's heartstrings?
Yeah.
You know, and then how do you do that? How do you pay, you know, do service to this person's story
Yeah.
and present it in a way that's going to allow
Yeah.
people to connect without making it about you?
Yeah.
You know,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you know,
you
that's
kind of
fascinating.
you peak too early, and then somebody like, oh wow, and then you've still got 500 words to read about, and you're like,
Exactly.
oh, and by the way, there's this, and you've kind of already, they're not as checked in. Maybe,
Exactly. You
as
got
a
to
reader.
watch that. That's really, really interesting.
And it's like, yeah, well, and you saying that, I had never thought of that, but you're absolutely right. It's a work of art, and it's really an act of service.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hopefully,
Yeah.
you know, as
Right.
you said, like when you tell a story, you're really trying to serve the storyteller, and you're also trying to serve the people reading it. And
Exactly.
you're looking at both of them. You're saying, how do we maintain? How do I serve them?
Right.
And with the lighting, I'm like, how do I serve the band? How do I serve the audience? Okay, so, like a random rule I have is like strobes should never be more than about 2 or 3 seconds long.
Yeah.
Period. It is agitating. Even in a metal concert, it's like all this screamo and stuff.
Yeah.
Not that I've ever done one of those, but I've thought about it, like if I did, and if you just sit there and do what lighting designers around the region refer to as strobe trash, it's really frustrating. And people who don't have epileptic problems start seizing out. It's not considerate. It's really frustrating. You start getting splitting headaches. You don't know why. It's jolting, and it doesn't even match the music.
Yeah.
It's not. You're not serving them now. You're not really serving the band. You're not serving the people that are trying to experience the band and the fullness that they want to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That makes sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. Now, how did you learn how to do this? How did you get into it?
Well, it dropped in my lap. I was at my church, and basically, I wanted to serve and volunteer in tech, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know anything about it. So, they put me with the kids areas, and said, well, you can help out tech there for the time being, and then if you show diligence and whatever, we can throw you in there if something ever opens up. I said, yeah, totally, that's fair. I just don't want to, wrangle the kids or all that. I was always I've always been kind of that more.
You don't want to be a cat herder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and like, I don't know, quick side note. I don't know if you guys are familiar with any personality test things like Enneagram.
A few.
Maybe?
Yes, I've heard of it.
What's your Enneagram?
I'm actually not sure. I'm actually not sure.
I think
don't know.
mine
What do you
has a
think I
J
am?
and a T in it.
Ooh, I don't. Oh, that's the
That's the
Myers-Briggs.
Oh, wrong.
J
Then there's
and
a
T, maybe?
disc
Maybe.
as well. That's another thing.
I'm
I
not
think.
familiar with that one.
Yeah, but the Enneagram's huge. I actually bought a book about them. I need to do the
I
test
think I've.
and figure it
yeah.
out.
Yeah, that's my favorite one
Yeah.
because it's the most flexible, and so
So what is yours?
mine's a 5-wing 6.
And what does that mean?
A 5. They're often described as a thinker. They're often described as having the most limited reserves of energy. They tend to get stuck in their head and think about things.
So
and
introspection would be a key word?
Introspection is probably a key word. They tend to be the kind of person that sits and thinks and mulls it over and wants more data and tries to learn and really views everything as a learning opportunity. Mm-hmm. I was listening to one guy tell a podcast. He said one time, like, if I'm ever in a large crowd of people and his friends were saying this about him, he said, I'll watch this guy and he'll be standing with a bunch of people, and all of a sudden I could see, like, it's almost like he floats above his body and starts observing the conversation occurring.
Like a sentinel.
Yeah. I was like,
listening.
Oh, that's so relatable for me anyways.
Okay.
Like, oh, interesting. How does
okay.
And I'm like, I'm interested, like, oh, that's what makes you okay. And I don't know. I seek understanding. I think that's probably the big thing.
Okay.
I seek understanding. How did I get off on that?
So how does the 6 impact you then?
Okay, so a 6, let's see. I'm not as well read on that one. The 6 tends to be like less trustworthy. Have y'all ever watched New Girl?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Nick is definitely a 6.
Okay.
Nick is a 6.
All right.
And his girlfriend, Reagan? Was that her name?
Oh, okay. Was that the one that
Megan Fox
played?
I can't remember her name. Reagan?
I think it was Reagan.
She's a
Something
5.
like that. Okay.
So if you were to combine those two personalities, like, she was an extreme, unhealthy, like, cold 5, and he was like this paranoid, nervous 6. And he'd like kind of awkward turtle his way out of things. It's so good. And if you were to combine those two, and then there's flexibility in there. That's not a perfect, science. Sure. It's Enneagram's kind of an art too, in a sense. You're like, okay, I kind of agree with that. I'm kind of like that, and I can be anything really. Mm-hmm. And really, that's a healthier way to look at it. Today, I'm feeling this or whatever.
Right, depending on circumstances, I would assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you were to combine those two, that would, in a sense, be a 5-wing 6.
Okay. And that's just kind of like a default perspective that you're going to tend to approach the world with.
Yep.
Like the filter you see a lot of things with, but you can react in different ways.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. That the processing of information, every personality processes information differently, or they have different pathways to process it. Mm-hmm. That's something that Myers-Briggs discusses. Like, for instance, one of the letters, one of the 4 categories is a thinker versus a feeler, and that's really unfair because it implies that thinkers don't feel and feelers don't think. That's not true. Thinkers approach logic differently, and feelers are logical too. They approach logic differently. They both think and they both feel. They just have different pathways. They might arrive at the same destination, but they have different pathways of getting there, and they're both good. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, there you go. We could probably go on that for a while. But
so are you more of a thinker or a feeler?
Oh, I'm a thinker big time.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Okay. All right.
On Myers-Briggs, I'm an ISTJ.
Okay.
Introverted, sensing, thinking, judge.
Okay.
Yeah. And judge is unfair too. Sounds so critical.
Right.
Yep.
The opposite is a perceiver.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway.
But it's like, are you going from here or here? Maybe
Right.
when you make decisions.
And
I just tapped my forehead and my heart. By the way.
Yeah. Are you going from your brain first, or are you going from your heart? You use both.
Sure.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually funny. 5s. Oftentimes in the Enneagram, sorry, we're going back and forth. This might be hard to follow. In the Enneagram, 5s are often labeled for being cold or whatever, or they can be. And it's like a lot of times a healthier 5 will start learning how to express the feelings more, because they just, I don't know, everybody, you don't know until you know, right? You just don't know.
And probably also on the reaction that you get from other people, right? If you're like, dang, I kind of came in that conversation
Oh yeah,
really cold and hard.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, okay, I don't want to talk to you now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man.
You're like, oh, you mean everybody doesn't
So-
do that?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Good to know.
And it's like, it's really, Enneagram was cool because I started reading about these personalities, and it gives you empathy for them.
Yeah.
You start realizing, oh, I see. They didn't mean it the way that maybe I first thought they did, And I'm like, oh, and now you have the ability, you can kind of understand and look at them with grace. Be like, okay, we have different pathways. That's okay. It's really interesting. I can learn from you. You can learn from me. Now there's more grace for each other. We can be more patient with each other. And if there is a miscommunication, we have more knowledge to figure out how to go about that.
Talking about that, there are a couple of things that I've learned over the years working in journalism. I see it play out over and over and over again. First of all, everyone is the hero of their own story.
Yep.
Nobody thinks they're the villain.
Yeah.
Nobody wakes up and says, there might be a small handful of people who wake up and
Sure.
say, how can I ruin someone's life today? But I'm thinking it's a very small handful.
I think so too.
It's not most people you're going to run into. It's really not.
And they're very hurt by that person or a group of people, and it's
Yeah.
it's very intentional.
Yeah.
But people do tend to feel like, they have, this leads me to the second point, everybody has a reason for doing or thinking what they do or think.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with it or not,
Yeah.
they have come up with a way to rationalize
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to them.
Yep.
And it either serves the greater good, or it's something that they can at least live with without, triggering some kind of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, right.
So I think that, it's better, I think, to try to understand people and know that, for example, if someone hurts my feelings, I finally gotten to the point in my life where I don't take it personally as much anymore because I realize that I am not important enough for anybody to have like a big murder board on their wall with a plot for how to ruin my
gracious.
life. No, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
By that, I mean just the big plan.
I see what you're saying.
You know what I mean? I'm not that important. If something happens to me, I'm usually collateral damage, and someone's just doing what they're doing because they think they need to do it, and
Oh,
it serves their
Goodness
story.
gracious.
So you really have to work through some of that.
Yeah.
It took me a long time to get there, but I think a lot of it's just talking to a lot of people and telling a lot of people's stories
Yeah.
and kind of putting that together over time. But I think it's really interesting that you've done so much work into looking at that and trying to understand yourself and other people and how that all works together. What led you to that?
Well, really, family life, my dad and I are more similar, and my mom and my sister were not like that. They're much more of like that feeling type. Let's be nice and comfortable and friendly and warm and fuzzy. And then my dad and I are always like, no nonsense, no beating around the bush, It's like, and all of a sudden you start getting feedback over your life as you're growing up. People are like, that really hurt my feelings. And you're like, why? You're like, I didn't mean it bad. And you're just sitting there like turned into a giant question mark. Like, I didn't mean to offend you, and then you start learning. You're like, well, then when people offend you personally, you start going, okay, now I'm starting to, the picture's growing. Now I'm learning how to communicate better. And eventually you start realizing, okay, so I need to learn how to be more gracious, and I need to be more careful about the words I say and do. I just need to be more intentional about making sure that people understand my intent, and then I need to especially be more intentional about trying to understand theirs, especially because if I can decide ahead of time that you're not malicious, because I agree. I think there's few people in the world that actually wake up in the day and say, guess what? I'm going to burn the world down today. It's like, I don't think that's usually the case. There are a few people who broke, they snapped, something happened, and they want to, I don't understand it, but they do. But most people, that's just not the case. It's just not.
Right.
That's not their default mode.
For sure.
And so when you can see that, you can and they tell you something that might be hurtful to you, and then you look at it and you kind of run it through your filter and you say, you know what? I don't think they meant that the way that I initially took that. I don't think that was meant to come off that way. So now I'm going to choose to not see it that way for now, and I'll try and find what's going on here. And sometimes you find out they really did want to hurt you. That's pretty not typical. Unless they perceive you somehow hurt them. Anyway, I think you kind of weigh every situation out.
Sure. I mean, one thing, and I think this is interesting, and this kind of leads me to something that leads into serving on the city council.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason that we're sitting down here and talking today, I think most people who've been following things for the last couple years may or may not know that you were part of an effort to try to recall the entire city council.
Oh, yeah.
And now you're looking to sit up there on the horseshoe with those people.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm thinking some of the stuff we're talking about is really going to have to come into play.
Oh, yeah.
If you're successful.
Absolutely.
How do you see that, making that happen?
Making which part happen now?
Any of it.
Well, there's the how are you actually going to win the election type thing, but I think that's later. But how are you going to connect to people, right?
Okay.
Use those skills to be able to connect to the community, and to other counselors, to city staff, to all these interactions that role will put you in.
Yeah,
right. I mean, especially given the idea that people may have sort of this view of who you are based on one thing.
Yep.
Or one position.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that part of it.
Okay, let's do it. So we ran the recall, right? Before we did, I asked the question, how's this going to affect these people personally? And I asked people, I said, I really do not want to mess up their lives first. And I was like, and this is not going to be seen as being in line with that intent. It's just not.
Yeah.
It looks aggressive. And I thought, am I going to hurt them? Is it possible that I will hurt them in a way I never intended to? I don't want that. That's not at all my heart.
Yeah.
Frankly, they're my neighbors, so to speak. We're all neighbors. So before I did that was a question I asked. I pretty quickly decided that I don't think it will. I'm going to just do my best to the best of my ability to try, and anytime I get those personal interactions with anybody who has questions about it, and I have, got a lot.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And it was always like, okay, all right. You've made some assumptions about me. I understand. And I always tried to check myself and make sure I wasn't making assumptions about people as much as I could help. We're not perfect, but we're all, giving them grace and making sure I don't want to attack them. Really, I don't want to hurt them. And so that was my thinking. I'm like, I don't want to hurt that's really not my heart here. I decided it was, I don't think I would. I'm not going to go bugging them, all that. I'm not going to go to their homes. That's not happening. Like not doing that.
You didn't
draw the line.
Blow up their email, their inboxes.
Oh, yeah. I never shot them angry emails or anything like that. That wasn't something I was interested in.
Not picketing on their lawns.
That's right. I was like, I don't want to do that. That's not appropriate at this time. There's examples in history, extreme examples where that was an appropriate response. I was like, this is not that. So I want to maintain, I do not want to burn a bridge. I'm thinking, great, I'm running a recall here. They're going to, a lot of people are going to view this as bridge burning, and I'm going to try so hard to make sure that I can overcome that assumption. We'll see. Okay, here we go. We run the recall. And I'm sure everything they were hearing about me was probably pretty bad, understandably. That's just what people's perception was. And and then it comes and goes. That all happened. And then life moved on. We all the dust kind of settled. I started going to the city council meetings, and I thought, let's see. I gave a couple speeches, and when I wrote these speeches, I don't remember what they were, but
I know they had to do with the Constitution.
Yeah,
there
course.
was a yes.
Yeah. Obviously. I can't help it. But I was like, I really want to drive a point without attacking the individual. Mm-hmm. That was very important to me. I'm like, I really, man, this is going to be and it dawned on me, I'm like, we've never met. They've only seen me on Facebook, people's commentary about me, things like that. That's their only interaction with me. I'm like, okay, so it's very important that I try and set, if I can, some kind of a standard here or a precedent here where it's like, hey, I really am not coming at you. I actually care about you in a weird way, like, believe it or not, it may not have looked that way. I care about you. I really do. Mm-hmm. How do I capture that properly? And how do I relay that correctly?
So I would say, my first meeting you would have been not in person, but would have been at a city council meeting when we were doing them on Zoom.
Okay.
Right.
And so in the video.
Oh, that's right.
And of course you had a bunch of different people getting up to speak, and then you came on and like you were very prepared, and you also had fantastic lighting.
Oh, thank you. It's just some Walmart lights.
Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Well, I mean,
well placed.
Well,
I guess.
Compared to somebody's laptop where you're looking up their nose.
Oh my goodness. I had a regret about that video too. I had a regret after I made it. I was like, you knucklehead.
Yeah. Well, so
I was like, that was too aggressive.
Well, that was the first impression. And the thing is, and if people don't know this, part of city code, when you go to speak in front of city council, you are not supposed to address them individually.
Oh, I didn't know that.
According to city code, you're supposed to address them as a body.
Okay.
You're not supposed to address them like individually. Now we can go back and watch them, and you never did that. And I never saw you call out like Councilor so and so or Mayor so and so. You are, da 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 da. And there were people that did that, and the council could have shut them down, but they didn't. And so, yes, I always viewed that everything you did was very respectful. The only that I do have one question on the end of that video is you said, stand by.
Yep. So all I meant by that was I knew Riley was going to say that phrase. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, oh, cool. That's kind of a way to show like we are, we're telling really the same, we're kind of coming from a similar perspective here. And that was taken like way, I was like, whoa, okay. So they did not understand what it just sounded too aggressive. And that wasn't,
well, were you thinking of the context in which other people had been using it and the larger cultural context?
I found out about that after it after the fact.
Oh, okay.
And then I was like, whoops. It's like, I see. I was like, well, good to know. We're going to not do that again.
and yes, so the larger context was, I think President Donald Trump mentioning, stand by, and I think it had to do with the Proud Boy situation.
It's not even just.
I'm not totally trying to connect you guys to any of that, but I think that had kind of been in our collective conscious hearing that, and then we heard it again, and then you start to make those assumptions.
Well, I mean, and there was this there's a connotation when it's used by those groups. Of an implied threat.
Oh, yeah. Goodness gracious.
That's the problem, is that there's an implication that it's a threat.
And I was like, hey, I'm coming back. I think I said, I'm not going away. Stand by. And I'm like, I'm not going away.
Yeah.
Please stand by. I'm coming back. I'm like, whoa. They took that like, I'm coming for you. And I'm like, that was not at all what I meant. And I'm like, okay, I need to think about that a little more closely now. And that was a good learning experience.
And before that, had you ever gone to a city council meeting?
Never.
Okay, and now you go a lot, right?
Yeah. I try to go every time.
Is it not? So we get into like super nerd city stuff.
Yeah.
Is
I
it
love
kind
this
of
part.
not like the most oddly exciting thing to like hear, even if it's like, okay, we're going to approve this zoning request to change this from a residential single family to commercial, and then you see the neighbors show up and they're like, no, please don't do that. You'll ruin our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Isn't it like oddly like fascinating and exciting?
It's really stimulating for me. I'm like, this is really interesting. I'm like,
you guys are my people. You guys are my people. I'm telling you, I've been walking around for years yammering about zoning and watching people's eyes glaze over.
Yeah.
So yes, I appreciate this so much. But yeah, it's the inner workings, right? It's the mechanical, the things that make your city work and that make things happen. And people don't understand until they pay attention.
Yeah.
Do you see the world differently or the city differently?
I'm sure I do. I don't yet know how, but I know I do.
Yeah.
And it is fascinating. You hear a perspective, you're like, that's interesting. And then you hear another, you're like, well, that's interesting too. And then you're like, how do we rightly divide this? Okay, let's take this situation and let's consider these circumstances. How am I going to affect you?
Right.
I mean, this is very personal.
Yeah.
And so, but it is very mentally stimulating for me. I find it very interesting. I'll be sitting there, I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Someone's like, you're going to ruin my neighborhood. I'm like, oh, and this brings into question, like, how are we going to be good neighbors?
Now the problem with this is when you're actually sitting up on that horseshoe and you remember the city council, at the end of the night, you have to make a Solomon-like decision.
You can't split the baby.
You can't split the baby.
That's right.
So you have to decide.
Yeah.
And those are challenges for sure.
Of course.
So, I mean, this is, it sounds like that first encounter you had, where you were like, okay, I didn't come across the way I thought I was going to or the way I intended to.
Yeah.
It was a really
this will
quick.
Get their attention. Boom.
It did.
I'm like, oh, baby, it did.
You were not wrong, sir.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, it was an introduction to public life.
Yeah, it was.
And that is something, once
true.
you become an elected official, it's like you're never off the clock.
Oh, yeah.
You don't get to just go off and be Mark somewhere and kind of, act like a butthead.
I already don't. Not that I want to be a butthead, but
right. But you know what I mean.
I already don't. The second I filed, I was like, well, my life's changing. Period.
Exactly.
Forever.
Yep.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah. And then you gotta interact with people. You gotta interact with people that maybe you never thought you would. Maybe you're like, do I have to?
Well, I mean, again, let me remind you, Enneagram 5 Wing 6. I love being home and left alone. It's really funny. And then I had to learn, like, okay, well, I'm here to serve you.
Yeah.
I am putting my head, that's appropriate. I'm putting myself out there to serve you. It's a public servant.
In part 3 of our conversation with Mark, you will hear his thoughts on public service and the role of government in the lives of citizens. Thanks again to Work It for sponsoring this series. For more information about Studio Stillwater and how you can help support our mission as a listener or sponsor, go to studiostillwater.net. There you can sign up for emails, get a free sticker, or send us a message. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.